Hey everyone, welcome to this next video. This video, we are going to be exploring the Russian army pay incentives. So what is this about? This is an analysis of the evolution of Russian military salaries and incentives in general as a result of the full-scale invasion. So let's jump right into the first slide. What we see here on the first slide is the Russian annual salary in graphs per year. So just the monthly pay annualized. And we see that in 2021, before the war started, an average Russian soldier would be earning 960,000 rubles per year. By 2022, that number went to almost 2 million. And when we look at 2025, we're now at 2.7 million. That's almost a tripling of their salary, so an increase by 182%. And when we look at the compounded average growth rate, which shows you how much that increased every single year, that would mean that you as a Russian soldier would be expecting your salary to be increasing by 30% per year. So this time next year, a Russian soldier might be expecting their salary to have increased by another 30%. And so just imagine if you, the viewer, would have your salary tripled within 4 years. That's already a very mind-boggling piece of data. But what does Russian ruble really mean? You know, that doesn't say much to us. So what I did was first I converted that using the average conversion rates over the various years over to US dollars. And that gave me a number that also didn't really mean that much either, right? So what I did next was I converted that actually to US dollars, but in purchasing price parity, because a US dollar goes much further in Russia than it does in the US. So what we're going to be focusing on in most of this slide deck, whenever it's in US dollar, is mostly PPP. But it's always explicitly written whether it's PPP or simply US dollars. So in each of these years, we see the left column. So for 2021, directly converted is their salary would be 13,000 per year. But when we look at it on a PPP basis, it's actually $35,000. So you have to imagine a Russian soldier would be earning the US equivalent of $35,000, right? And when we look at that over the years, again, an astounding explosion, less explosive than the pure ruble salary, but still 130% increase, right? Still a very large increase, almost a tripling, no longer a tripling, but almost a tripling. That's a 23% compounded average growth rate. So you would expect your salary to increase by almost a quarter every single year. That's very impressive. And with $80,000, you can already do, so almost 81,000 US dollars PPP in 2025, you can already do quite a lot even in the US, right? So you have to imagine, right, that these people are earning a lot. So in the next analysis, I wanted to take a look at what does that mean. Where does that put a Russian soldier within society? So essentially looking at the Russian annual salary versus the rest of Russia. How incentivized am I as a Russian person to join the army, right? And when we look at 2021, the average Russian was earning 13,000 US dollars. And that put them right on this graph here in the top 20%, right? So the top 20% starts at 12,500 approximately US dollars in 2021. In 2025, all of those deciles shifted upwards, right, due to inflation and salary increases. And we see that even though the Russian soldier earns more than double, they still fall within that top 20th% decile. But we see that they're far closer to the top 10% decile, right, at 32,000 US dollars per year. This is probably due to the high Russian Gini coefficient, right? In Russia, the bottom 90% don't earn that much more than each other, but then when you reach the top 10%, it really starts shooting upwards. But so that was actually quite surprising for me to see that from 2021 to 2025, even though the salaries doubled, almost tripled, that they are still within the same decile. But the picture changes. The Russian soldier no longer simply earns a monthly salary. And so the annual salary doesn't show the whole picture. Since the full-scale invasion in 2022, a whole set of new incentives have been launched. First of all, the federal sign-up bonus was launched. This is a bonus that is given on a federal basis. Everyone across each oblast or state or region of Russia is entitled to have this extra bonus if they sign up to the military. And this was a bonus which was not existing before the war. Secondly, another incentive that was not existing before the war is the regional or municipal bonus. So here I've highlighted the oblast of Samara, I believe, in the picture. And so each of these oblasts and regions has a quota or a target of people that they need to send to the front that is imposed on them by the federal state. And so each of these oblasts will try to incentivize people to differing degrees by offering different sign-on packages, by offering this extra sign-on package. So you have a federal sign-on bonus, and you have a bonus based on the region that you sign up to. And that's also why you hear that some people are driving from one region to the other to sign on there, because this region offers a higher regional sign-on bonus. And then once they've hit their quota, people start going to the second best region or oblast to sign up. So that's something that you see happening. And then the third bonus that we've noticed is the out of action or death bonus. And here we're going to be focusing on the death bonus. Essentially, there has always been a death bonus for being in the Russian military, but also this bonus has increased drastically since the war started. So let's take a look at these three bonuses. And when looking at the data, the true growth lies in these additional incentives, going from a non-existent section of the pay, right? Some of these are growing from 0 to something. So it's a growth that is not quantifiable and have become a significant percentage of total pay. So when we look at the federal signing bonus in rubles, we see that in 2021 it did not exist, right? So here I'm only comparing 2022 to 2025. That's a growth of 105%. So it doubled within the time span of the war, right? But in essence, people who used to receive 0 rubles for signing up now receive 400,000 as a sign-on bonus. And the regional signing bonus varies quite a lot based on the region. So here I'm only comparing the 2022 with the highest of 2025. And in 2021, it was not existent either. So when we compare 2022 with 2025, the highest one, we see that's a 300% increase from 200,000 approximately to 800,000, depending on the region. And so that's also an astounding growth, right? That's 4 times more than in 2022. So they're really doing their best here to convince people to sign on, because they get, when you simply add these two, 1.2 million rubles simply for signing the contract. You know, they straight out the job, they can send this money back home or do whatever they want with it. That's already a significant chunk. But the largest of the bonuses, taking a look here, is the death bonus. So the death bonus is also increased drastically, but surprisingly, exactly proportional to salary increase. So when we look at the death bonus, there's also highs and lows because it changes within the year sometimes. So what I'm taking is, if I'm looking at the high from 2021, which was 5 million, and comparing it to 2025, we see that it's a growth of 180%. That is almost exactly the growth of the salary for a Russian infantryman. right? From 5 million to 14 million, that's 180%. Yeah, that is the growth of the salaries from 2021 to 2025 for Russian infantry. And we can see that because in 2021, the death bonus was 5.21 times the salary. So it's so it would take you 5 years and something to achieve the death bonus, 5 years of working, 5 years of your salary in totality to get that death bonus. Well, in 2025, it's not that much different. It's 5.18, which means, again, you would have to work 5 entire years plus 18% of a sixth year in order to achieve that simply through your salary. So in absolute terms, we can say that the death bonuses increased massively from 5 million to 14 million. But it is surprising to see that the growth is exactly proportionate, at least according to my findings, to the wages that are being paid by the Russian state to soldiers. So comparing these three bonuses and looking at the overall picture, the federal sign-up bonus grew enormously from 2021 to 2022, from 0 to hero, right? It didn't exist before. However, after that, from 2022 to 2025, it grew by 105%, so it doubled. The regional and municipal bonus, that one also made a massive jump from 2021 to 2022 because it did not exist before that. And thereafter, it had growth over time, right? But it seems that for some reason, it's grown for some regions, but it's been flat for others, which gives me a hint that some regions are hitting their targets easily and some are not. Or for some reasons, let's say in Moscow, it's far harder to convince someone to sign up than in another region that is suffering from extreme poverty. And then finally, when we look at the death bonuses or the out-of-action bonuses, but here I only focus at the death bonuses, these have actually grown proportional to salaries. So 180% growth from 2021 to 2025. So now that we've looked at these bonuses, which I did not look at before, how much is the most an infantryman could have earned in 2021 versus an infantryman who joined in 2025? So on the left side, we have 2021 versus 2025 in rubles. And in 2021, you would have earned 960,000 per year, right? Because there are no extra bonuses in 2021. In 2025, you would be earning 3.9 million rubles. So far, far more. That is 4 times more, an increase of 307%, right? Thanks to these extra bonuses, regional and federal, that explode your overall salary, really incentivizing you to sign up. And again, doing that analysis, but in a USD PPP basis, we see 2021, you would be earning the equivalent of 35,000 US dollars, which in the US is really not a good salary. But by 2025, you are actually earning 116,000 US dollars PPP. So that makes them really good earners, even in the US, right? Even in the US, that person would be living a good life. An increase of 232% in PPP value, still a huge increase, not 4 times larger, but still a significant increase. And so this is actually life-changing money. And so it's not surprising that the Russian government has been able to convince people to sign up for this life-changing money. You know, if you're earning 116 or 117,000 US dollars PPP worth money, and you come from extreme poverty, there are extremely poor regions within Russia. This is something you do not spit at. This is something you actually think about, right? And so even within Russia, there are massive differences between regions like Moscow and St. Petersburg. And then when you take a look at many of the other regions in Siberia, down in the Caucasus, the Far East. These regions are underdeveloped. Some of them are developed thanks to the petrochemical sector and the gas sector, but many of these regions are really underdeveloped and have extreme poverty. And so if we, in the notes on the right side, you see that I write, death would result in another 418,000 US dollars in PPP value sent to the family, right? So if you think about that, 117,000 USD PPP for signing up as a salary annually. But then if you were to die, your family, your wife, or whoever else would be receiving $418,000 worth of money. And that's in PPP value. And think what you could do that in the US. So that's again a huge chunk of money that is convincing a lot of people to sign up. So with the addition of the federal and regional bonuses, the 2025 annual income pushes an infantryman very, very firmly into the category of the top 10% of earners in Russia, right? So 46,000 non-PPP dollars put them, if we look here in the bottom right of the graph, very comfortably within the top 10%, maybe within the top 5% of Russian earners. So we've established that these bonuses don't just put the Russian soldier in the top 20%, they push them in the top 10% and potentially even higher. So in very firmly within the top 10% of society. Imagine what the top 10% in the US would be earning, right? What you would do to become part of the top 10% in the US. Well, all of these people are signing up in Russia to become part of that top 10%, excluding the death bonus, right? Because the death bonus is again an insane bonus of more than 400,000 US dollars PPP value. So let's reflect that on for a moment. The 117,000 plus another 418,000 upon death would be equals to more than $500,000 US dollars purchasing price parity. And that's almost 18 million rubles with no education or skills necessary. That's also an important thing to note. Really anyone can sign up to this. Old people are signing up to it, young people, people that are not particularly preferred to become soldiers in the first place pre-war would now definitely be accepted, right? And you would get access to becoming part of the top 10% of Russia. And on the left here on the slide, we have the price in thousands of Russian rubles per square meter. So we see that Moscow is at approximately 330,000 rubles per square meter, and St. Petersburg 200,000, and from then it really drops down. And so let's take a look at Samara, since I had Samara in some other examples. Samara looks to be a Sears city, since it's on this list in the first place, and approximately average, right? At 113,000 rubles per square meter, right? So if you were to buy a 150 square meter apartment, which is a very nice apartment in Samara, this would cost you 17 million rubles, right? So straight out the bat, you can see that that's less than the salary plus the death bonus of a Russian infantryman, right? So in theory, a Russian son could afford his parents a large flat if he would die. A husband could allow his family to pay off their debts on their house, right? Live debt-free, maybe buy a car or two on the side. A grandpa who's retired can join the army, and if he were to die, he could ensure a large and significant inheritance for his descendants. So this is really, as I said before, life-changing money. And so for many people in economically difficult situations, this is a very strong incentive to join the army. If you looked at that graph in the previous slide where we looked at the deciles within Russia, and I'm going to pull it up for myself again, the bottom 10% in Russia earn an annual income of less than $1,000, right? Not PPP, not PPP US dollars, but just converted rubles to US dollars. Even the bottom 50% earn $3,000 in 2025, non-PPP US dollars. So joining the army can really catapult you, your family, your kids, and many other people that you love into the top 10%, top 20% of society, just like that. Never had to go to university, study anything. You can just do it, right? And so this is a very attractive proposition that the Russian government is making because they need manpower, and so they need to increase that incentive every single year to attract more and more people. And when we look at the next slide, we can see that this is actually not just conjecture, it's also the truth. We are looking at here some headlines from the Financial Times, Kiev Post, New York Times, 112 UA. Some of them definitely biased, right? Most of them probably biased against Russia in the war. But still, where there's smoke, there's fire. So find a soldier, he dies, you get 8 million. Russian realtors' advice on how to buy a home sparks outrage. So essentially, it's a realtor advising clients, female clients, to just marry a soldier, wait until he dies, and then buy a house, right? Russia showers cash on men enlisting in Ukraine war, bringing prosperity to some towns. So some of these really poor towns in the middle of nowhere of Siberia are suddenly being flooded with an influx of these massive annual salaries, right? More than 117,000 US dollars PPP value of money. All of these salaries getting pumped into these small towns and villages. And then by the Financial Times, this money will now be used to buy an apartment for his son who just got married and his other son who is going to university, right? So the money coming in from these salaries and from the death bonuses allows his sons to get put through university, and he gets apartments for both of them. The largest type of payment is death money. These are paid to the families of deceased occupiers and amount to nearly 150,000 USD. The publication emphasized that this is enough to buy an apartment in many Russian cities. People who wanted to join the army out of patriotic feelings have mostly already been recruited, killed, or wounded. There are very few such people left in Russia. The final headline. So, yeah, the amounts in these paragraphs might be different because as time went by, the amounts for the death bonuses, the death money, as they call it in this article, have changed, have increased. And we can see that it's really creating a massive societal shift. All of this money flooding into the poorest part of Russian society. And we see that it's a supply and demand curve here, where the Russian government and the regions need to keep increasing the pay in order to hit their quotas and to convince people to join the army, right? And this, when we look at the next slide, this has also had an effect. Even though the pay is increased significantly every year, there are still not enough people, and therefore recruitment from poorer countries is in full swing. Here, taking some headlines from DW, Der Welt, BBC, Babel, and the National Interest. Cubans lured to Russian army by high pay and passports. Cuba is a very poor country, and the pace in Russia is comparatively a very, very rich country compared to Cuba. And so it's not a surprise that many people would be lured by this massive pay. Next headline, Russia is recruiting men from Nepal, India, and other distant countries for the war in Ukraine. They come to earn money, pay recruiters thousands of dollars, and end up on the battlefield. So here, Nepal and India, again, countries which are far poorer on average than Russia. People are joining the military. They're even paying recruiters thousands of dollars if I'm reading this right, they're paying recruiters to be able to join the army and end up on the battlefield to earn these high salaries. Russia just recruited 1,500 foreign mercenaries to fight in Ukraine. How Russia is recruiting foreigners to fight in Ukraine. And then who is being recruited? Recruits come from countries in South Asia, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Africa, the Middle East, Cuba, and former Soviet states. The majority are young men seeking significant financial gain compared to earnings in their home countries, right? So they've sort of exploited the easy wins within Russia, right? The salaries are as high as they are. They're top 10% salaries, and still they need more men. And so they're looking for alternatives. And an easy alternative for this is apparently people from South Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Cuba, and former Soviet states, most, if not all of which, are much poorer than Russia, right? And so this begs my next question. Do you get paid at all, right? That's if you get paid at all. Because recently, and we're now on mid of July, leaked documents claim Russia's 41st Army suffered catastrophic losses fighting in Ukraine. As of June 1st, 2025, at least 8,625 troops from this army had been killed. 10,491 were listed as missing in action, and another 7,846 had deserted. So I'm here entering the space of conjecture. It's not necessarily facts, but assuming these Russian leaked documents are correct, they state these numbers, 8,000 dead, 10,000 MIA, and 8,000 deserters. I am suspicious about that 10,000 MIA. Right? What could possibly have happened to 10,000 people within the 41st Russian army that they're missing in action? Where could they be? What happened to them, right? And so I believe, right, unless they're POWs, so if Ukraine has that many POWs, which I do not believe, because Ukraine has not managed to capture that many prisoners. Neither has Russia managed to capture that many prisoners from Ukraine outside of the beginning phase of the war. So how is there such a large number, larger than the number of dead, larger than the number of deserters there? What happened to these people? So I believe that these people are possibly, or potentially, sorry, there's a wasp here. I believe that these are possibly dead troops which have just not been confirmed to be dead for whatever reason, and can potentially never be confirmed dead. So what happens during such a war, right? If you look at World War I, which is a similar trench style warfare as here, you have attacks, you have explosions, people are in their trenches, artillery falls, the trenches collapse, and the people are buried, yeah? And they never find them again. They never find them again, ever again. And they're still digging up bodies from World War II across the Eastern Front in Ukraine, in Russia, and many other Eastern European countries, right? So it's possible that many of these bodies will only be found hundreds of years from now, if not never, right? So that's one possibility. Because my assumption is that a death bonus can only be paid out upon confirmation of death, right? And until then, these people are simply put as MIA, right? This is good for the Russian government because they don't have to pay out all of that money. And that money is more than 5 times an average, the annual Russian pay. So when we look at that in terms of money, these 10,000 MIAs equate to 150 billion rubles in terms of death bonuses, right? And that is 1.9 billion USD only for the 41st Army, right? And there is not just the 41st Army involved in this war. There's over, and this is from a quick search, 13 other major Russian armies participating in this war. And a side quest from this little thought experiment: if there's 13 other armies, and if their numbers look even slightly like the 41st army, then the Russian death estimates look quite accurate, right? At over 100,000 at this stage of the war. But coming back on that, because obviously every army has different compositions, every army is obviously not at the same section of the front, has not suffered the same casualties and losses, so I'm not going to dig into that. But on a high level, if we multiply 14 times 8.6k, let's just do that now, 14 times 8,600, that's 120,000 deaths, right? And I'm making the assumption that potentially many of the MIAs are also deaths that have not been confirmed. But again, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now, because this is just simply a high level estimate. Taking a step back, when we look at the short-term incentives, when we look at this data, right, 150 billion rubles that Russia has not paid, assuming all of the MIAs are actually dead, which they won't be, right? But let's take a high-level estimate. 150 billion rubles have not been paid in MIA money. There is definitely a short-term incentive for Russia not to acknowledge MIAs as being dead, besides the news side and the morale side. But there's also the side of, in terms of money, right? They save 150 billion rubles. That's almost $2 billion US. However, the long-term hiring incentives are to pay out these MIA actual death boni, because if they do not, it discourages further recruiting. Right? Let's say you're an average Russian civilian, and you are thinking about joining that top 10%, top 5%. But you know, and you've heard the rumors from your village, because many other people within your village have signed up to join the Russian military, that let's say 4 of your buddies from school joined up. You know that you don't hear anything from any of them anymore, and 2 of them have been definitely confirmed dead and have received the money. But the other 2 that no one ever hears anything about, and everyone is sure that they're dead because they're missing, they're MIA. Those families are not receiving that death bonus simply because of the fact that they disappeared, right? And that makes you think twice before you decide to sign up. And so how is the Russian government then going to convince you to join? Well, what they do is they just increase the boni and they increase the wages again. So next year they're going to increase it again, and they're going to increase everything again by 30%. And maybe that will be enough to convince you next year to join, right? And that's why they keep increasing this, but they're in a negative cycle. Because then again, if they don't pay out certain boni, right, like the death bonus, many people will choose not to join, which means they have to increase the numbers on paper again. And so here they're locked into a negative cycle, which I believe is also reinforced by the fact that the chances of dying are increasing year on year, right? So the lethality of the front in 2025 is not what it was in 2022, where everyone was driving around in tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. And in 2025, people are driving around on motorbikes, scooters, quads, and ladas. Which brings me to this next slide. And that is, the trend is likely to continue upwards as hiring becomes harder and harder, in particular as lethality is increasing significantly, especially as of 2025. So when we stack up all of these numbers that we've explored throughout this video on top of each other, we see that in 2021, you only had a salary and a death bonus, which brought you at approximately 6 million rubles stacked up. And in 2025, that total number is approximately 18 million. That's a 30% yearly, year-on-year growth and a compounded average growth. And if you compare 2021 to 2025, that's a 201% growth. So a tripling of your salary, or of the, not just your salary, also all of the potential bonuses that you could earn, including the death bonus, which you can only earn once, right? Because then you're dead. So every year, the compensation has risen by 32%. And as a result of supply and demand, the Russian government has to increase the incentives ever further, including hiring from abroad, right? And that's why we see this increasing, this graph going upwards all the time. It's actually surprising that in 2025 we have not yet seen an increase of the death bonus, because in every other year we have seen one. Potentially it's still coming. And we know that the lethality on the front is also increasing. See the other video on the channel, or either it's already been uploaded or it's going to be uploaded soon. So if it's not uploaded yet, subscribe. And if it's going to be uploaded soon, or if it has already been uploaded, subscribe anyways, just so you can look at that other video, which has already been uploaded, if it is the case. But so the lethality is increasing on the front, as described in my other video, which explores that side of the conflict. And this means that civilians will demand more and more money for an increasingly dangerous job, right? I need to get paid more to put my body on the line for your war. And now that I know that it's more and more dangerous for me to do so, I'm going to ask for more money, right? And it's actually, again, if you think about it, insane to think they're offering top 10%, top 5% salaries in order for people to join the military. It's almost like offering investment banking jobs to millions or hundreds of thousands of people across like to put it into perspective, like investment banking jobs for all these people, right? So that they can join and, you know, capture, I don't know, 2-3 kilometers of land, you know, at the expense of 300 dead in a day, or 1,000 dead in a day. And yeah, that is a crazy thing to think about. And that's where I'm going to close off with some key questions to explore. So some key questions I just thought about while making this that I thought were interesting. And that's a death bonus. The first one is, the death bonus is by far the largest expenditure for the Russian state. Will they truly honor this, right? Large number of MIAs. And right, that's the thing I explored earlier, is the Russian government actually really honoring that side of the bargain? Because it's just so much, right? It's a lot of money. If you take that for all the deaths so far in the war, or the future dead in the war, especially since they need to pay them more and more each year, that is going to hit the budgets harder and harder, especially as lethality is increasing. And what will be the impact if they're actually not honoring it? Many people will choose not to sign up if it is the case that the Russian government is not always paying out these death bonuses. A second thing, at what point is lethality so high that people actually no longer take this life-changing money? The time of death is reducing significantly as the Russian offensive uses armor less and less. Again, driving in a motorbike and a Lada to the front line is very different from 2022 and 2023, when everyone was in these nice armored vehicles. Sure, they might bomb your vehicle with a drone, but you would not be dead. In many cases, you would be able to escape and run back to your lines. Now, if a drone bombs you, if an FPV drone lands anywhere near you, any bit of shrapnel, if you're on a motorbike, any bit of shrapnel will just fly straight through you. So it's much more lethal, it's much more easy to get wounded. And so I'm really curious, where do people start drawing the line? And I think this has a lot to do with how much information people actually have of the conditions on the front, right? How well is the Russian government filtering the information that an average person in Samara, on the not in Samara as a city actually, but like on the countryside somewhere, is able to receive, or are they only receiving propaganda? Number 3, at that stage, conscription becomes the only option, right? But this would be conscription at the worst possible moment in the war, the deadliest moment in the war. And the Russian state would no longer be bound to pay salaries, boni, along classical supply and demand curve, as it is doing now. How will society react? So far, it has been a war waged mostly by willing soldiers. So what I mean here is that it's tied to the previous question. At what point is lethality so high? So let's assume lethality has become so high they cannot replenish the front line with bodies anymore. So what is the option? Conscription. If you conscript someone, you're actually forcing them into the military. You, as Mr. Putin or as a Russian government, you no longer have to pay these people the salaries that you were offering and still are offering, because they're essentially forced to fight for you. Slave soldiers, basically, right? And so suddenly you will have a reduction in what you need to pay your soldiers, right? The pay goes down. But so far you were fighting with people who voluntarily signed up, mostly, right? Suddenly that also goes down. So the people that you're hiring or forcing into your military are no longer there because they want to be there. They're there because they're forced to be there. Morale goes down even lower than it is now, which I don't know at what stage it is right now. So that has a definite negative impact, and that will have a definite negative impact on society overall. Because again, so far it's a deal that you close with the government, you bring me to the top 10% of society, I will put my body on the line for you. And from one day to the next, it's possible, and it still is possible, that the Russian government will have to say, okay guys, not enough people are joining the army. We're going to have to force everyone here into the army to push the front line forward. And suddenly you will have a large army with a large number of people who did not want to join in the first place. And second of all, they will be even less happy if they find out that they're not being paid a proportionately as good a salary as what everyone was earning in the past years until now. And then the final question that I wrote here is, what is the long-term impact of having the army being the top 10% earners in the country for so many years, right? That is just something that I find is crazy, in the sense, again, putting it into perspective. The top 10% of earners are people that are creating destruction, right? They're not adding anything to the economy. They're not creating, they're not adding value. They're actually taking value, by taking other people's lives. In theory, if Russia wants to conquer Ukraine, in order to have an added value in this conquest, you need to capture the lands, as much land as possible, as intact as possible, with as many Ukrainian people within it as possible. Because every person adds value to the economy, the intact cities adds value, the lands itself is valuable too. But instead what you're doing is you're destroying all of these cities, you're destroying the land, and you're murdering the people on it. So it's a very destructive job. And on top of that, you're actually killing yourself too, because the chances of dying are quite high on the front line. So not only are you destroying the value of the land you're taking over, you're also destroying the value of Russia by dying, right? Because you do have value as a Russian person. Also being a simple farmer, earning a low salary, you're adding value. But if you're dead, you actually do not contribute to society at all for the rest of eternity. Neither do all your offspring, right? All of your offspring, in theory, they also will contribute to society in one way or the next by contributing and adding value. And so suddenly, the top 10% of earners have now become destructive instead of constructive people. And these people will have more power, right? They will have more say within society because, like it or not, these people are now a significant, offer significant purchasing power within Russia. They're the ones buying the houses, they're the ones buying the nice cars. And so they have more of a voice within society in the direction of Russia. And so it's, as I said, it's like offering investment banking salaries to average Joes to go to war in Ukraine. What and how will this change Russian society, right? Because it's now become a very, very war-driven society, very low unemployment, high pay in the army, but also in the military sector. So everything is now revolving around this. And what I mean to say is that there will be a big shock within the economy when this inevitably changes, right? At some point, you cannot keep maintain a destructive economy, and you need to switch back to a constructive economy. And yeah, how will that change and how will that impact the economy? I have no clue, actually. I have really no idea, but I don't think it will be good. That's what I do. That's what I do think, although I also don't know that for sure. So if you like this really long video analyzing the evolution of Russian pay and incentives throughout the years, please leave a like, please leave a comment. If you have better answers to these questions than I do, write your ideas in the comment section. I'm happy to look at them. And I probably missed a lot of stuff here. And subscribe, of course, if you like this content. Subscribe, that's the best message for me to see if I should keep making such type of content. So thank you, and bye-bye.